Every survival list on the internet starts the same way, like a broken smoke alarm with a YouTube channel. Water, canned food, flashlight, batteries. Congratulations, you have discovered the exact same 4 items every suburban gladiator has been hoarding since the invention of Facebook groups and panic. You already know those. Everybody knows those. Your neighbor knows those. The guy who thinks owning 2 cases of bottled water makes him the warlord of cul-de-sac Sector 7 definitely knows those. That is not the problem. The problem is the things that vanish before the average person's brain has even finished buffering the phrase "this might be serious." This list is about the first 6 hours. Not day 3, not week 2, not the romantic fantasy where you're striding through a ruined city in a tactical backpack with cinematic dust on your face. The first 6 hours are where the intelligent, the experienced, and the slightly paranoid quietly walk into stores, grab what actually matters, and leave while everyone else is still fighting over bread and posting, "Does anyone know what's happening?" under a photo of a traffic light that stopped working. These are the items that disappear fast, not because they're obvious, but because only a small group of people understand how emergencies really unfold. They know what breaks first, they know what people forget, and they know modern society is basically 3 skipped meals away from becoming a very loud anthropology experiment. So let's begin where the smart ones begin. Not in the water aisle, where people behave like the apocalypse is a Black Friday event sponsored by dehydration. They go to pool supplies. Item 1. Pool shock, calcium hypochlorite. It sounds like something a supervillain dumps into a reservoir, which is probably why normal people ignore it. But the people who understand water purification walk right past the shelves, stripped bare by panic and head for the section nobody thinks about until summer. A proper bag of high-strength calcium hypochlorite granules can be turned into a disinfecting solution that treats thousands of gallons of water. Not bottles, gallons. The chemistry matters here. You are not drinking pool water like a deranged lab raccoon. You are using controlled dilution to make contaminated water safer when the taps are questionable and the bottled water aisle looks like a crime scene. And this is where reality gets uncomfortable. In any real grid failure, clean water becomes the central issue almost immediately. Most people think thirst kills fast. Usually, it is contaminated water that gets you first. Diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration, infection. Civilization looks a lot less sturdy when your body is losing fluids faster than you can replace them. Pool shock, stored properly and kept dry, lasts a long time and does an extraordinary amount of work for something most people walk past on their way to chlorine tablets and inflatable flamingos. That is why it disappears early. Not because the crowd understands it, but because the crowd never even notices it until the people who do are already gone. Item 2 is one of those things that sounds embarrassingly ordinary until you've gone 48 hours without running water and suddenly understand that human dignity is a thin fabric stretched over plumbing. Baby wipes. Unscented. Sealed. Not the fancy lavender nonsense that smells like a spa for infants. Unscented matters because fragrances can irritate skin, especially damaged skin, and in a survival situation, you do not need your hygiene routine doubling as chemical warfare. Baby wipes are sanitation without infrastructure. That means cleaning hands, face, sweat, grime, wound edges, surfaces, and the parts of your body that become a morale emergency when showers are no longer part of the social contract. People underestimate hygiene because comfort has spoiled them. They think it is about feeling fresh. No, it is about staying functional. Skin infections, rashes, contaminated hands, dirty wounds, all of that escalates fast when medical care becomes difficult. A small cut in normal life is an inconvenience. The same cut, in a grid-down environment, after 2 days of filth and bad decisions, can become a very serious problem. The reason baby wipes vanish is because experienced people know cleanliness is not luxury. It is damage control. In a disaster, civilization shrinks until basic sanitation feels like advanced technology. That sealed multi-pack under the baby aisle starts to look less like parenting gear and more like a portable insurance policy against your body falling apart one neglected detail at a time. Then we get to item 3, and this is where the average person reveals they have never actually had to improvise anything harder than an excuse. Contractor garbage bags. Not the cheap kitchen bags that tear if you look at them with emotional intensity. Real contractor-grade bags. Thick, heavy, black, brutal. A normal trash bag is basically a suggestion. A contractor bag is a tool. Shelter layer, rain cover, ground barrier, gear protection, waste containment, improvised poncho, water collection, and in a pinch, one of the fastest ways to keep a cold, wet night from turning into a misery marathon. This is the kind of item people ignore because it feels too simple. Survival marketing has poisoned common sense. Folks would rather buy a titanium multi-tool forged by Viking astronauts than a box of thick plastic sacks that can actually solve problems. But in bad conditions, versatility wins. Exposure is a killer. Wet clothes, wet gear, wet ground, wet wind, and suddenly your body starts bleeding heat like a busted radiator. A contractor bag can separate you from that chain reaction in seconds. It is ugly, not tactical, not sexy, and absolutely more useful than half the overpriced junk sold with the word survival stamped on the package in military font. Item 4 looks even more innocent, which is exactly why it catches people off guard. Superglue. Cyanoacrylate. Yes, the tiny tube you associate with gluing your fingers together and ruining a table. In the right context, it becomes one of the most absurdly effective emergency items on the shelf. The same basic chemistry has been used in medical settings for wound closure. That does not mean you start gluing every injury shut like a sleep-deprived action hero with internet confidence. Dirty wounds, deep punctures, bites, and heavily bleeding injuries are a different problem entirely. But a clean, straight laceration that needs the edges held together can sometimes be managed fast with the right adhesive when better options are absent. And beyond that, it repairs gear. Cracked plastic, split seams, broken handles, detached soles, damaged containers. In a collapse, little failures multiply. One broken buckle becomes lost equipment. One cracked shoe sole becomes a blister factory. One leaking container becomes wasted water. Superglue does not look dramatic, so people overlook it. But the quiet truth of emergencies is that small repairs preserve capability, and capability is survival. The person with all the expensive equipment but no way to keep it functional is just carrying future disappointment. That is the pattern here. The first items to disappear are not always the obvious ones. They are the things bought by people who understand systems, friction, and human stupidity. While everyone else is shopping like they are preparing for a snow day with better branding, the prepared are already securing water treatment, sanitation, weather protection, and repair capability. The essentials behind the essentials. The invisible layer that keeps the visible layer working. And we are only getting started. Next comes the item people laugh at right up until they cannot walk without making the face of a man being audited by God. Wool socks, specifically wool, not cotton, not those cheerful synthetic things marketed by people who have clearly never had to move 10 miles with wet feet and no guarantee of sleeping indoors. Cotton is comfortable right up until the moment life becomes difficult. Then it turns into a damp punishment sleeve that hugs your skin, traps moisture, and grinds your feet into blisters with the devotion of a personal enemy. In normal life, a blister is annoying. In a collapse, it can be the beginning of a chain reaction that ends with infection, immobility, and the ugly realization that your survival plan was emotionally ambitious but physically illiterate. Wool works because it still insulates when wet, regulates temperature far better than cotton, and resists odor long enough to keep your feet from becoming a biological incident. This matters because feet are transportation. Transportation is options. And options are what separate survivors from people sitting on a curb saying, "Well, this is bad," while the world quietly gets worse around them. If you ever have to evacuate on foot or just spend long hours in damaged, wet, debris-filled environments, the quality of what covers your feet will matter more than whatever inspirational quote you once posted about resilience. The experienced people know this, so the sporting goods section gets hit hard early. Not because everybody suddenly becomes a mountaineer, but because the few who understand stress injuries buy before the herd figures out that sneakers and optimism are not a transportation strategy. 3 pairs is a minimum. Rotate them. Dry them when you can. Air your feet when possible. The body can absorb a shocking amount of hardship if your feet are still in working order. Once they are not, every problem becomes larger, louder, and more expensive in pain. Item 6 is information. Verified, low-tech, ugly little information. A hand-crank AM/FM radio. Not your phone. Not your I'll just check updates online fantasy. Not a battery-powered gadget that becomes decorative plastic the minute your spare batteries are gone or your child borrowed them for a dinosaur toy 6 months ago. A hand-crank radio is the kind of thing modern people dismiss because it reminds them that infrastructure is a privilege, not a law of nature. Here is what happens in real crises. Cell networks overload. Backup systems burn down their limited reserves. Local internet access gets patchy or fails outright. Rumors move faster than facts, and suddenly everybody's main source of intelligence is their cousin Darren forwarding voice notes like an oracle with a concussion. A hand-crank radio cuts through that nonsense. It does not need a charging cable, a signal plan, a functioning tower network, or a social media app full of strangers screaming contradictory nonsense in capital letters. It gives you direct access to broadcasts, emergency alerts, weather updates, and official messaging while the digital world is busy eating itself. And there is a psychological reason this matters too. In uncertainty, the human brain is a rumor factory. When people lack reliable information, they fill the void with fear, speculation, and whatever half-credible nonsense confirms their existing panic. That leads to bad decisions, movement at the wrong time, shelter abandoned too soon, resources wasted, trust misplaced. Information is not just awareness, it is emotional regulation with an antenna. The person with a radio hears what is actually happening. The person without one hears that the military has sealed the county because someone's aunt saw headlights near the highway and put dramatic music under it on TikTok. Then we arrive at item 7, and this is the one that quietly embarrasses almost everyone listening. A printed contact book, names, phone numbers, addresses written down, on paper, in a waterproof sleeve, if you have any sense. It is hilariously primitive by modern standards, which is exactly why it matters. Almost nobody memorizes numbers anymore. Why would they? Your phone remembers everything. Birthdays, routes, passwords, phone numbers, where you parked, what you were supposed to buy, and probably your blood type if you once typed it into a form half awake. Modern convenience has outsourced memory so completely that many people can't contact their own family without a charged rectangle and a functioning network. Now remove power, remove network reliability, add stress, add movement, add the possibility that your phone breaks, gets lost, or dies at the exact moment you need to coordinate with the 3 people you actually care about. Suddenly, the smartest object in your life becomes a smooth black brick full of memories and no practical use. Most people can recall maybe 2 or 3 key numbers under stress. That is not a communication plan. That is a wish wearing shoes. Write them down. Family, close friends, doctors, neighbors worth trusting, work contacts that matter, meeting places, street addresses, critical medical info if needed. This takes almost no time and has one of the highest practical returns of anything on this list. Because communication in disasters is not just about convenience. It is about synchronization. Where do we go? Who checks on whom? Who has supplies? Who knows the backup location? If everyone is relying on memory and dying batteries, the group fractures fast. And fractured groups make stupid, lonely decisions. Item 8 gets underestimated for a different reason. Fishing line and hooks. Small, cheap, lightweight, easy to ignore. People hear fishing and immediately picture some cinematic end of civilization lifestyle where they're nobly catching dinner at sunset. Reality is less poetic and more practical. A compact line and hook setup gives you a low-weight, low-cost option for food acquisition that fits in a pocket. It is not guaranteed calories. Nothing is. But it is optionality. And optionality is gold when supply chains are broken and food access becomes unpredictable. It also has secondary uses, because real survival tools do more than one job. Monofilament line can serve as a repair aid, a trip indicator around a rest area, a way to secure gear, or a component in improvised traps where legal and ethical conditions are no longer your main scheduling concern. The point is not that you become some wilderness demigod overnight. The point is that for almost no cost and almost no weight, you gain another route to problem solving. People who think clearly in emergencies love items like that. And that is the quiet theme of this entire list so far. While the masses grab whatever looks familiar, the prepared grab capability, they buy mobility, communication, hygiene, repair, information, and low-profile versatility. They understand that collapse is not one giant dramatic moment. It is a pile of small failures arriving all at once, each one asking whether you planned for what people usually forget. We still have more to go, and the next items get even more brutally useful. Item 9 is baking soda. And yes, that sounds about as exciting as tax paperwork, which is exactly why it stays invisible until the right people clean out the shelf. A large sealed box of sodium bicarbonate looks like kitchen clutter to most people. To someone who understands emergency utility, it is a cheap multi-purpose tool hiding in plain sight. It helps with odor control when sanitation starts slipping and everything smells like a failed species. It can be used for basic dental cleaning when toothpaste becomes a memory from the old world. It can help with minor cleaning jobs. It can suppress small grease fires. It can even serve in limited first aid and digestive contexts when used correctly. One box replaces a surprising number of single-purpose products, and that is exactly the kind of math-smart survivors do before everyone else realizes stores are becoming museums. This is one of those items that proves a larger point about preparedness. The best emergency gear often looks boring because it solves ordinary problems, and ordinary problems become lethal when systems disappear. You don't lose civilization all at once like a movie set exploding in slow motion. You lose it in layers. First convenience goes, then reliability, then sanitation, then trust. Then, every little thing you used to solve with a quick purchase or app notification turns into a fresh logistical headache. That is where multi-purpose items shine. They reduce friction. They preserve energy. They stop a dozen tiny annoyances from snowballing into one giant catastrophe. Item 10 is work gloves. Real ones. Leather palm, cut-resistant, full finger coverage. Not the floppy garden gloves people wear while pretending to enjoy yard work. In a serious emergency, your hands become your main interface with chaos. You are moving debris, lifting splintered wood, handling rough metal, opening damaged containers, working tools, clearing sharp trash, and navigating spaces where every surface looks like it was designed by a lawsuit. Bare hands do not last long in that environment, and once your hands are damaged, everything becomes harder. Opening supplies, carrying water, climbing, repairing. Even basic hygiene gets complicated when touching anything hurts. This is one of the most overlooked realities in disaster situations. People think about weapons, not blisters. They imagine dramatic threats, not the deeply stupid experience of slicing your palm open on broken laminate because you were in a hurry and underprepared. But hand injuries are brutal because they multiply helplessness. A bad foot slows you down. A bad hand slows everything. If medical care is delayed or inaccessible, even a modest cut can become infected, swollen, and functionally disabling. Gloves disappear early because the people who have done physical work under stress know exactly how fast unprotected skin loses an argument with the real world. Then comes item 11, And this one sounds almost ridiculous until you start listing what it can do. Heavy-duty aluminum foil, not the whisper-thin kitchen stuff that tears if a breeze looks at it wrong. Thick, commercial-grade foil. This humble metallic roll becomes incredibly useful the second you stop thinking of it as food wrap and start thinking like a desperate engineer with deadlines imposed by weather. It can be shaped into cooking surfaces, packet meals, reflective signaling aids, improvised funnels, protective wraps, heat reflectors, and coverings for storage. In a world where containers break, tools go missing, and proper equipment is never exactly where you need it, foil becomes one of those weird little miracle materials that keeps earning its place. And yes, there is also the electronic angle. People talk about shielding small devices from electromagnetic threats using multiple tight layers of conductive material. That is a more specialized use, and not every scenario demands it, but the reason experienced people buy heavy-duty foil is not because they think they are starring in a classified military briefing. It is because versatility matters, and this thing does far more than people assume. Like contractor bags, it lives in that category of deeply unglamorous material that solves surprising problems. Survival is not always about heroic gear. Sometimes it is just about having the right boring object at the exact moment your life gets stupid. Item 12 is where people start clutching their morals, like decorative throw pillows, high-proof spirits, vodka, whiskey, something sealed and strong. Suddenly everyone acts scandalized, as if civilization has not spent the last few thousand years proving alcohol has a place in medicine, trade, morale, and terrible decision-making. But let us be honest. In a prolonged disruption, a bottle of high-proof liquor is useful. It can serve as a disinfectant in limited situations. It can help start fires under difficult conditions. It can become barter material because human beings, even in collapse, remain magnificently predictable creatures with stress, habits, and cravings. And perhaps most importantly, it stores well and is widely recognized as valuable. Now, before anyone starts role-playing as a frontier pharmacist, this is not a cure-all, and it is not a substitute for actual medical supplies. Pouring whiskey on every problem is how you turn an emergency into a folk song. But in honest preparedness, utility matters more than respectability. People leave this item off lists because it sounds messy, morally gray, or unserious. Reality is messy. Reality does not care about the aesthetics of your checklist. In harsh conditions, barter matters, morale matters, and stable value matters. A sealed bottle checks more boxes than people like to admit. Which brings us to item 13, the final one, and if you only choose one item from this entire list, this is the one that makes the strongest case for itself: duct tape. Real duct tape. Original silver, fabric-backed. The kind that actually holds under stress, instead of peeling off like a cheap lie in warm weather. It is hard to overstate how useful this stuff becomes when normal repair systems are gone. Shelter tears, windows crack, gear splits, shoes separate, containers leak, splints need securing. Improvised bandaging needs reinforcement. Friction points on the body need protection before they become full-blown injuries. Duct tape is not elegant, it is not specialized, it is not pretty. It is just relentlessly useful in exactly the kind of ugly conditions where usefulness becomes the only beauty standard left. There is also a brutal little detail here that many people never learn until they are already suffering. Blister prevention works better before the blister forms. Tape over high friction points early, especially if you know you will be walking hard in poor conditions, and you may prevent the injury altogether. That is how preparedness actually works. Not dramatic genius, just small interventions applied early enough to stop pain from becoming damage. That principle runs through this whole list. The prepared are not always stronger, richer, or braver. Often, they are simply earlier. Earlier to notice, earlier to buy, earlier to act while everyone else is still emotionally negotiating with reality. And that is the real divide in the first 6 hours of a serious grid collapse. It is not between heroes and cowards. It is between people who understand systems and people who think systems are magic. The unprepared assume stores will restock, information will clarify, apps will work, and someone competent will take over. The prepared know shelves empty faster than explanations arrive. They know panic is noisy, but competence is fast. They know modern life has taught millions of people to confuse availability with permanence. Everything feels stable until the machine coughs once, and then suddenly society is one low battery notification away from group therapy with sirens. The next step after this is not just owning the right items. It is knowing what to do first, because gear without sequence is just a pile of hopeful objects. And in the next part, that sequence starts to matter. So now you have the list. 13 items, none of them glamorous, all of them brutally practical, and every one of them likely to vanish before the average person has finished posting. Does anyone else feel like something weird is going on? But here is the part that matters more than the shopping list itself. The real difference between prepared and unprepared people is not the objects. It is what those objects represent. Foresight, sequence, calm under pressure. The ability to understand that when a serious grid failure hits, you are not buying gear. You are buying time, options, and reduced suffering in a world that is about to start charging interest on every mistake. Because that first 6-hour window is not random, it is a psychological gold rush. A weird human stampede powered by denial, social contagion, and the sudden realization that the systems everyone worshipped as permanent are actually just tired machines held together by maintenance schedules and optimism. At first, most people hesitate. They wait for confirmation. They scroll. They ask if it is local. They look for someone official to tell them whether they should be concerned. They want certainty before action because modern life has trained them to outsource judgment. But by the time certainty arrives, the shelves are bare and the useful items are already in someone else's trunk. That delay is deadly in slow motion. Behavioral scientists have a name for part of this problem: normalcy bias. The brain resists accepting that a real disruption is happening because accepting it would require immediate behavioral change. So instead, it tries to reinterpret the event as temporary, manageable, familiar. The power is not out because the grid is unstable. It is probably just maintenance. The empty shelves are not a warning. It is just people overreacting. The lack of signal is not infrastructure stress. It is my phone being weird. Meanwhile, the prepared are not wasting energy arguing with their emotions. They are moving, quietly, efficiently, without a dramatic speech. They do not need to feel brave. They just need to be earlier than everybody else. And that is what makes these 13 items so revealing. Every one of them is tied to a predictable failure point in real emergencies. Water treatment because clean water becomes questionable fast. Wipes because sanitation collapses before people emotionally register it. Contractor bags because weather and waste do not care about your denial. Superglue because small repairs prevent larger losses. Wool socks because movement is survival and injured feet are a trap. Hand crank radio because information without infrastructure becomes priceless. Printed contacts because memory has been outsourced to glass and lithium. Fishing line because food security is about optionality, not fantasy. Baking soda because one simple compound can solve 10 annoying problems before they escalate. Work gloves because hands are how humans impose order on chaos. Heavy-duty foil because versatility beats aesthetics. High-proof spirits because barter, disinfection, and morale have ugly but real value. Duct tape because the world breaks in stupid ways and somebody has to keep it together. That is the hidden lesson. Preparedness is less about buying survival gear and more about understanding failure chains. You do not ask, what would look cool in a bunker photo? You ask, what happens when water is questionable, movement is harder, information is scarce, and little problems stop being little? That mindset changes everything. It is why experienced people often have boring kits and impressive outcomes, while amateurs have expensive kits and deeply inspirational regrets. And let's be honest, Modern society is uniquely vulnerable to this kind of collapse psychology because so many people have never had to solve physical problems directly. Most daily inconvenience now gets solved with a swipe, a delivery app, a charging cable, or customer support. Need food? Tap screen. Need directions? Tap screen. Need entertainment, contact, identity validation, and a synthetic approximation of human tribe? Also tap screen. Remove power and network reliability, and millions of people are not just inconvenienced, they are cognitively disarmed. The skill gap becomes visible overnight. One person sees a dark room and thinks, "Where are my candles, batteries, radio, water, and backup contacts?" Another sees a dark room and thinks, "My phone is at 12%. That second person is not prepared. That second person is emotionally subscribed to civilization. So what should you actually take from this list besides the urge to buy duct tape and question your life choices? First, preparedness does not require paranoia. It requires honesty. Honest assessment of what breaks first. Honest assessment of your own weak points. Honest acceptance that comfort has hidden many of the systems keeping you alive. Second, cheap ordinary items often beat specialized gear because they are flexible, available, and easy to use under stress. Third, action taken early is worth far more than better action taken late. That is true in medicine, in fire response, in evacuation, in communication, and in every other area where time turns inconvenience into danger. There is also one more uncomfortable truth. None of these items matter if panic owns you. A person with half this list and a calm brain beats a fully stocked fool every single time. Stress narrows attention. It wrecks memory. It causes people to fixate on the wrong detail while obvious threats grow teeth nearby. That is why rehearsing simple decisions matters. Where do you go if communication fails? Who do you contact first? What gets filled with water immediately? What room is safest? What supplies are gathered in the first 10 minutes, the first 30, the first hour? You do not rise to the occasion in disasters. You fall to the level of your preparation, your habits, and whatever fragments of logic survive the adrenaline dump. That is why lists are only step one. A list can tell you what disappears from stores in the first 6 hours. It can warn you what knowledgeable people grab before everyone else catches on. It can even save you money, pain, and some truly humiliating mistakes. But after that, sequence becomes king. The first moves after confirmation are what determine whether those supplies become force multipliers or just dead weight sitting in a closet while you improvise badly in the dark. Because once a grid collapse is confirmed, the clock is no longer measuring time, it is measuring consequences. Every minute of hesitation changes traffic patterns, shelf availability, signal reliability, and public behavior. Every wrong move compounds the next one. The first 60 minutes are where the shape of the next week begins. Do you stay or move, gather or conceal, communicate or conserve, fill containers or trust the tap, blend in or attract attention like some tactical peacock with a shopping cart? Those decisions matter more than most people realize, and they matter fast. So remember the real lesson here. The gap between prepared and unprepared is rarely money. It is information understood early enough to act on. It is the ability to look at a perfectly normal store shelf and recognize which boring item becomes priceless the second the machine starts failing. It is choosing practical capability over fantasy. It is knowing that the end of convenience does not announce itself with dramatic music. Sometimes it arrives as silence, empty aisles, a dead signal, and the weird little moment when everyone around you suddenly realizes they have no idea how anything works. And that is when the smart ones are already home.